welcome to the Trust and Accountability panel. I actually think this is probably one of the most important panels of the day, because we've heard the word trust come up a variety of times. We've talked about governance, we've talked about transparency. Our panelists today all play roles in that process in actually making it happen and putting the checks in place, literally. See what I did there? So I think there's a lot to learn here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So I think maybe we'll start on the end with you, Brian. You know, all these companies are deploying AI solutions, various capacities. I imagine some of them are coming to KPMG and saying, okay, we're ready to go to market. This is what we did. Just sign off on this for us, okay, so we can get insurance. How do you deal with companies that are coming to you? How do you check? How do you validate? Like, what are your first steps when a client comes to you and says, we've got something new, and it's pretty novel, and there's not a lot to compare it to?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I would say, first and foremost, oftentimes we're trying to get in that conversation much sooner than after it's been deployed. And I think that's a key part for any of the things we're going to talk about, governance or trust, establishing that and thinking through these things up front. It's much easier than coming in on the back end. And so, you know, we always start with, you know, understanding that particular companies, do they have some sort of usage policy, some sort of a value statement that they've made or that they've communicated as to how and where they think it's okay or acceptable to use AI, either in their products or in their company. And then from there, working through that and understanding the particular use cases that they're trying to deploy. What is it that they're trying to get out of that particular AI model or AI application? You know, what value are they seeking? What outcomes are they seeking? And then from there, working our way through a process to say, okay, you know, what framework would make sense? So we put together a framework, and I think you heard earlier today from one of my colleagues about the work that we're doing internally. And so we've built what we feel is a very comprehensive framework. We call it the Trusted AI Framework. It's informed by a number of the leading frameworks like NIST AI, RMF, NISA, some others, but also a lot of the proposed global regulations. And so we went through that and essentially did a mapping to say, do we have what we feel is comprehensive? From there, and what we would do with the companies that we're working with is essentially work through that and say, what then is relevant for this particular use case? Recognizing that most companies are going to have, in many cases, hundreds of AI models or AI solutions that they're going to put together. And so we'll work through that process to risk assess, and I think that was talked about yesterday as well, is, you know, what are we doing? What sort of data are we using? You know, who are we going to interact with customers? Is it an internal solution? Is it an efficiency play? Is it going to have some sort of sensitive data within the models? And so really working through that to define, you know, ultimately a governance framework that'll work for that particular solution. And then from there, figuring out, you know, where do we communicate, what regulatory considerations are there, et cetera. So very high level, but that's how we work our way through it.
Nice. So Nia, one of the themes we're trying to learn here is to learn from the past. So we've had various technological inflection points. The app boom was you know, one of the more recent ones, and one that came with some real privacy risks. You're with Google now. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you started checks, how it works, and where it fits into this equation.
Yeah, so thanks also for having me here today. This is definitely a topic that I'm passionate about. I actually started off, I'm a lawyer by training, so I also lead our legal efforts on checks. But prior to that, I was product counsel on the Play Store. And, you know, I told a number of people here, I don't have many apps on my phone because when you know what's happening and how, you know, all of the advances that can happen, like in your privacy-centric, you're a little more hesitant. But I'm also a believer in technology, right? I think innovation is important. I absolutely love all of the excitement and the things that can come from AI and elsewhere. And so I truly believe those two things can coexist. And so after going, you know, working through the challenges, putting out fires, as they say, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to help. And so my co-founder, Fergus Hurley, and I came together. He's a product manager, I'm a lawyer, and we came up with this idea to create an AI-powered privacy compliance platform. And so we first started looking at mobile apps, because I think one of the things we've heard throughout this week, that this is hard, right? Safety, transparency, protection. But we have to figure out how to do this practically so that people can actually apply these things. And so that's what we did. So when we were looking at privacy compliance, data privacy in the mobile app space, we really wanted to say, you know, what are the pain points? How can we make a difference? And that's where checks came out of. So what we do is we have our own framework that we apply, which is we look at what an app is required to do, what an app says it's doing, and what an app is actually doing in the wild. And then if any one of those three is out of sync, that's what we report in our platform. So we were trying to help developers have more transparency across the process.
So I think if I can just double tap on that, because I think a lot of people are afraid of AI and afraid of their data being used, and they're sort of, it makes them uneasy. I don't think people are afraid of apps. And I think that they've probably at this point have more reason to be afraid of apps than of AI. So maybe just paint the picture for people why they should be concerned when they install an app, either from any store.
So I think it's about information. And so I tell my friends, I'm like, you have to read what they say. No one wants to read a privacy policy. That's where the information is. You know, now many of the app stores have these information labels to make it a bit easier. But it doesn't work if we don't read and if we don't inform ourselves and be thoughtful, because I think someone earlier talked about, oh, yes, it was Ken. He was like, if the consumer knows how you're going to use the technology and how it benefits them, then that's an informed decision and an easy trade-off. And the same is true in the data privacy in terms of app space as well. If consumers are informed, and if you choose to inform yourself, you can make the decisions that are right for you. And so what we want to do is try to make it easier for everybody, right? So for the companies that are providing the apps, you want to provide these amazing resources, but you also need help in the compliance space, and that's where we come in.
Yep. So Cosmin, Ken just left the stage talking about the importance of the medical industry and the anxieties people have about sharing medical information. Your company solves some of those problems, also provides a framework. Talk about how you fit into that process.
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges for companies that want to adopt AI in the market today. Just to give you a few examples, balancing innovation with AI risk management, it's one issue. The fact that there is not a consistent approach to AI risk in large organizations, especially when they have multiple business units that are deploying AI, what we noticed is they run different risk management processes, so there's not consistency there. There is also the risk of risk of reputation and customer trust. But we believe that the biggest challenge that companies face today is is the risk of losing competitiveness when they approach, they contemplate with regulations and they do not deploy AI fast enough. So in the last couple of years, we've been focusing on a few pillars of success for our clients, and those were rapid compliance, getting to the results fast, having a consistent and continuous risk control process. So if you look at AI, the way it evolves very fast, especially this year, you can see everywhere this. You also need to have a solution in place that has multi-dimensions, and also it's a continuous, ongoing monitoring that is happening, in the AI space. So reimagine AI governance as a set of, not just a set of constraints, but as a strategic enabler. What we are doing really good, we think, is automating and simplifying AI governance. So you get to the models faster to production, they are more efficient, they are trustworthy, and in general, you increase efficiencies and you deploy stuff faster.
So how are you checking these models and these services, and sort of how are you assessing the risk for these companies?
So we have our platform has multiple modules, but one of them is a technical assessment. So we run through a set of checks, for fairness, for bias, for explainability, safety, and various angles that we look at. And we create a score. It's like a scorecard, and this can happen ongoing is not just a one-time process.
But these standards, it's not as if you're pulling on existing standards. I mean, you've created these guidelines, but are they the same guidelines that any other company would use, or are you inventing them one at a time? Are they all custom?
Well, there is a framework that has been launched at the beginning of the year, the NIST AI RMF, and we are following that. Our platform also has support for other frameworks, like the draft version of the UA Act and others that are Singapore released one. So because we are selling globally, we have to look at each particular country. But we follow, in US, we follow the NIST AI RMF.
Let's talk about that in terms of global regulation. I think I assume that like the European Union is out in front of us. They've got more restrictive regulations. They're going to have more privacy protections than the U.S. at least at first. Brian, you study these things. Is that true right now? Are they still leading the way? And how far behind is the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are out ahead, but when you look at, and we did some comparability of what's in the EU AI Act against, like I mentioned, NIST and a few other of the frameworks, and most are talking about and concerned about the same topics. And so I think our recent executive order goes a long way in at least aligning the U.S. and kind of what we should be focused on and activating the agencies to actually kind of move forward. And so there's a number of steering committees and consortiums being stood up on the heels of that executive order, and I think that will help accelerate progress. But I do think in terms of being closer to, I'll call it a published framework, or set of regulations. I mean, the EU AI Act is out ahead of where we're at today. But again, when I look at it in comparison to like the NIST AI RMF, we're covering a number of the same topics. One area of difference that we've observed, and it's buried in some of these topics, but it's not called out as clearly. And when you think about the ESG topic, there's a number. If you're in the AI space, you're going through VC or you're into products. Most of the funders are asking for term sheets related to sustainability now. It's also coming up in terms of questions from investors and activists saying, hey, you're now building these energy-consuming large language models. How do you balance that with the statements that you've made publicly around ESG, sustainability, et cetera? So that's an emerging topic that we're seeing come out. And I think is when you look into the details of NIST, elements of that are in there, and I think we'll continue to see that get a little bit more pronounced as we go on.
Do you think the way the European regulations are now, do you think they're too restrictive, or do you think they got it just about right?
I think that they are pretty restrictive and they're pretty specific, and I think that where the U.S. is, especially as we heard last night. I think where the U.S. executive order comes in is it's allowing us to have more flexibility, setting guardrails, but also, today, at least the way it's described, allowing a bit more flexibility for things to evolve. I do think that we'll see, and you've even seen it on the various different iterations of the EU AI Act that have come out. It's continued to evolve, and I think we'll continue, to see that. So, it is, like I said, it is a little bit more prescriptive. It's a little bit further along. But many of the topics are the same.
So Nia, for checks, you say you have your grid, you've got your triangle, you see what they're doing, then you report that in. Does the consumer see that information? Does it get reported into Google and then they can regulate it that way? Like, what's the action item? What's the takeaway there?
So our customers are the developers, so the companies with the apps, and so they're the only ones who have the information. As you can imagine, we're a very privacy forward, as I said, product, because without trust, it's hard to manage. I think, I talked to some folks here, who have startups and then more mature products, and you can't do everything at once, and you have to be able to balance that. And so one of our focuses is, making sure you're the only one receiving this information, so you can decide on a spectrum of risk, what things are acceptable for you to fix now, what's, more important to you now, or what's a higher risk now, because I truly believe that making even small incremental changes is better than doing nothing, which is what people or companies can tend to do, is put your head in the sand. But it's important to do something and keep trying and keep leveraging technologies to try to, to attack this.
What do you think some of the biggest risks out there are that you've seen, that you've reported back that, tell us a little bit about behind the scenes. You don't have to mention specific apps or companies or anything like that, but just the types of problems that often slip by unnoticed until you run your checks.
I think the most surprising thing is the simplest thing. It's communication. It's information. You have a lot of folks to actually be compliant. You have a number of people, a number of stakeholders. I think we were talking earlier about there's more cross-functional teams. So there's legal, engineering, head of product, et cetera. And sometimes it's just, you don't have time to talk and say, oh, I thought I meant to tell you I should change this, or we shouldn't have that SDK anymore, or I thought they actually took that out. That what we kind of help with is really that the insights across these teams, that the amount of time that you may take to do these, whether it's spreadsheets or multiple meetings, time is something most of us don't have, that's where the mistakes or things that you overlooked can happen, and that's what we've seen more so over and over, that just being able to bridge the gap between all of the teams is what's most helpful.
Yeah, I think this is one of those technologies too that requires an interdisciplinary approach inside organizations. So if you leave it up to the engineers to build the product and ship it, it often ships with certain things missing. And it may work very, very well, but it doesn't necessarily have that, it may be ethically unsound or have privacy violations. Like, how do each of your sort of approaches sort of connect all those stakeholders and make sure legal is talking to engineering, is talking to marketing, and that everybody's on the same page as these things roll out? It seems like all of you have roles to play in that. Cosmin, maybe talk.
Yeah, this is what our platform does. It connects all the stakeholders inside an organization, and we see that multiple departments have to be involved, and our platform is actually used by starting with risk managers to legal officers and compliance officers, data scientists, and various IT professionals that need to share whatever the findings, also take some actions. Based on those.
It's a dashboard that everybody can share.
Yeah, there are different dashboards based on the role of the person that is looking at it, and they have different tools that are ability to interact with it and take the following actions.
Yeah. I think that's one of the promises, if you will, on AI is, we're seeing with the customers that we work with, it's bringing together groups of stakeholders that otherwise normally would not, I would say, interact as much as they are. So when we're putting together kind of these internal AI councils or centers of excellence or governance committees with our clients, we have folks from HR, IT, tax, DEI functions within the organization, finance, in some cases procurement, legal. And so you're seeing groups of people, and it's interesting because very early on in those conversations when we stand up those groups, that's exactly what we hear is we should be doing this more often. Mm-hmm. And so exactly what Naya was mentioning is you're seeing that come together. And so I think if that continues, I think right now it's happening because there's so much unknown and there's fear and there's challenges and risks that everyone's talking about. And so companies are trying to be thoughtful in how they use and deploy these and also just be responsible from how they're managing risk to the organization. But hopefully that trend will continue because I think that cross-functional collaboration is really driving organizations forward in their adoption as well, and also kind of the mitigation of the risk.
If I could add, I think we've talked about this a lot this week about AI can fill the gap in ways that might not be there. So, for example, you may not have the resources for a compliance team, perhaps, but you can leverage the technology to provide you similar insights that allow you to either take action or get specific help in a certain area, or even in the development of the apps, right? Like we've seen that, like it's opening up a whole slew of new developers, right, with the help of AI. So it's bringing new voices, new insights into this space. So I think that too is an exciting part of this.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hopeful aspects to it. It's such a complex challenge. It's almost too hard to wrap your head around. However, if you can deploy AI to help manage AI governments, that's the holy grail. That's when it's all working the way it's supposed to. And I think all of you are sort of associating, figuring out ways to use the tool to govern the tool.
Yep.
And I don't know, Cosmina, maybe I'll give you the last word in terms of the medical industry. And I mean, you work across all different industries,
Yeah.
but I think it's most pronounced in the medical industry in terms of the regulations that already exist there in the US in terms of HIPAA and then globally. Just talk a little bit about like how these tools are helping people sort of manage and make sure that healthcare data is protected.
Yeah, I mean, all the industries are affected by this, not just healthcare. Some are more than others, and healthcare is one of those. But we see a need for a couple of things here. One of them is human in the loop, and I think we discussed about this earlier. It's, you cannot really rely on automation on some sort of decisions regarding patients without someone actually overseeing that. Models will be tested and we'll find various loopholes in them, I'm pretty sure, but there is always a need for human presence. I think also some interesting stuff that might come out, and we were discussing earlier about this as well, is how do you identify if a certain output is coming from an AI or is from a human, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something that I think we are, interested in seeing, like a digital signature or stuff like that. So.
Excellent. All right, well, we're going to head to a break pretty soon. We've got another quick presentation, but thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation.